A couple came to see me recently. They already own a condo and they have made about 300,000 on it already. They also have investments outside property, which are earning about 8 to 10% returns a year. So they were not asking me, can we afford another property? They asked me something much harder. Should we switch to a property that can give us higher returns? And what is the switching cost? They are already financially savvy, so their next question is what a seasoned investor would ask. Is our money working the hardest it can right now? It sounds like a simple question, but I couldn't answer it. Not because I didn't know the market, but because that's the wrong question to answer first. Before I recommend any property, I first need to know whether switching is even the right decision. So let me tell you about this couple, April and Brian. They are not first-time buyers. A few years ago, they had bought an EC, made a healthy profit when they sold it, and rolled those proceeds into a condo in the north. Around 2021, when they bought that property, they bought it for about 1.35, and now it's worth about 1.66 million. Now, there's another detail. Although they own a condo in the north, they are not actually living there. They have rented it out. Instead, they are renting another condo in the Ang Mo Kio area because that's where their children's school is. So this isn't really an upgrading conversation. It wasn't about buying a nicer home. It was whether the property they own was still the best place for their capital. When we first sat down, Brian was very clear. Our priority is maximum capital appreciation. Simple enough, or so I thought. Then I started looking at how they bought their current property. One detail immediately caught my attention. When they purchased this condo, they structured it mainly around Brian's income. Immediately, I became curious. Because after decades of doing this, I've learned something. I don't just listen to what clients tell me. I also pay attention to the decisions they've already made. Sometimes, those two things point in exactly the same direction. But sometimes, they reveal something the clients themselves haven't even thought of. So instead of recommending a condo straight away, or just finding out the maximum loan they can take, and ask them to just buy the latest, most expensive new launch, I built a couple of different scenarios. Not because I wanted a complicated spreadsheet, but because before I recommend any property, I want to test reasonable strategies by having all the numbers first. That's when this simple question, should we hold or should we switch properties, turned into a conversation about the next 20 years of their lives. By the way, if today's discussion has made you wonder where you stand in your own property journey, I've created a free property retirement scorecard. It takes only about 5 minutes to complete. It's not there to tell you whether you should buy a condo. In many cases, you may be doing everything right already. It's just there to help you assess whether your current property is putting you on track for the gains and retirement that you want. You'll find the link in the description below. Now let's get back to the video. So the first thing I wanted to know was this. What if they simply did nothing? No selling of their condo in the north, no buying, no need to pay any buyer stamp duties, no agent's commission, no legal fees, no moving. Just keep the condo in the north and let time do the work. So first I wanted to see what is the growth rate per year for that condo. Now according to ERA's trend analysis, this development has been appreciating at roughly 3% a year. Of course, nobody knows whether it will be exactly 3% over the next 10 years. It could be higher, it could be lower. But let's just use 3% as a working assumption. So here's what happens. They bought the property in 2021 for around 1.35 million. So if we use the 3% growth, in 10 years, it's projected to be worth around 1.81 million. So when you own property, two things are happening at the same time. The property's value may be increasing, while your loan is quietly getting smaller every single month. So let me show you what really happens. Every month you're paying your installment. So part of it is interest, part of it reduces your loan. So while the property's value is going up, the amount you owe the bank is quietly going down. The difference between the two, that's your equity. And honestly, that's not a bad outcome at all. If someone came to me with no intention of changing anything, I'll have absolutely no issue telling them to just hold on. This strategy has a lot going for it. No transaction costs, no disruption, no additional borrowing, and sometimes doing nothing is the right decision. But here's the question I couldn't ignore. April and Brian didn't come to me asking, Can we make money? They were already making money. They came to me asking, is this the best use of our capital? And those two are very different questions. So after looking at the numbers for holding, the next question was obvious. Can we put our capital in a better performing property? But before that, April and Brian also asked me a very sensible question. What does it actually cost us to switch? Because switching is not free. The moment you sell one property and buy another one, there are costs involved. Buyer's stamp duty, agent's commission, legal fees, moving expenses. And when I added everything up, it came to about 143,000. Now, 143,000 isn't small money. You can't just ignore it. So I told them, before we even think about buying another property, let's first answer one question. Can the next property earn back that 143,000 and then some more? Because if it cannot, then there's no point moving. So the goal is not to look for a nicer or newer property, but a better performing one. So I started looking around the area they're currently renting in Ang Mo Kio. Remember, their children are already studying there. They are already quite familiar with the neighborhood. And I found a condo in Ang Mo Kio that is quite new, only a few years old. According to the ERA trend analysis software, this property's annual growth rate is 4.5%. A 3-bedroom apartment, priced at around 2.6 million. So I just wanted to say that the rate is based on past performance, so it's not a guarantee or a promise. But it's just the data we have to work with now. Now here's where things get interesting. At first glance, you might think it's only growing at 1.5% more than their current property. It doesn't sound much. But property doesn't grow in a straight line. It compounds. And when it compounds, a small difference in growth on a much larger asset over 10 years creates a surprisingly large difference. Holding their current property gives them projected equity of about 1.08 million. If they switch to this property and they sell at the 10-year mark, this property will give them an equity of around 2.6 million. That is like double the money if they were to make the switch. And if they sell in 20 years, their equity will be much higher as follows. This is because property is a long-term game, and the more time you give it, the more likely it is to work in your favor. Now, before you get too excited, we are not finished yet, because that comparison isn't fair. They didn't get an extra 1.3 million for free, because they had to put in more money. The purchase price is higher, the down payment is higher, the installment is also higher, and there are also legal fees and stamp duties. So all these have to be factored in. So now I would like to answer the third question, which is our money working the hardest it could for us now? Okay, let's see. So when April and Brian bought this property a few years ago, they didn't pay the then purchase price of 1.35 million in cash. They only put down the down payment, which is 337,000, and the rest they took a loan from the bank. So 10 years later, the equity is projected to be around 1.08 million. So investors don't ask, how fast is the property growing? They ask, how fast is my money growing? So the annualized return on their capital for the two properties will be as follows. So for April and Brian, strategy 2 of switching produced the strongest projected outcome, even after allowing for approximately 143,000 in switching costs, even after accounting for the additional capital required. So in terms of projected equity built up and the projected return on their invested capital, the option of switching to a higher performing property is the better strategy. So before I even compare different properties, I want to answer another question. How much should they actually spend? April and Brian's household income is about 24,000, and they are eligible to buy a 3.5 million property. But just because the bank says that you can borrow more, doesn't mean that you should. So for every strategy, I built multiple scenarios. So this column assumes a purchase at around 2 million, and this one around 2.3 million, and another column is 2.5 million, and this one around 3 million. Now for every scenario, I wasn't just looking at the purchase price. I wanted to know how other numbers change when the purchase price is changed. So I calculated things like how much cash and CPF would they need for the down payment for each purchase price, what would their monthly installment look like for different interest rates like 1.5%, 2%, 2.5%. And after paying the down payment, how much liquidity would they still have? How many months of emergency reserves would remain? Because buying property isn't about whether you qualify for the loan. It's about how your life looks like after you buy it. So when you see all these numbers together, something interesting happens. You're no longer making decisions based on emotion or too much emphasis on one particular factor, like the growth of the property price. You're making decisions based on trade-offs. Maybe the 3 million property creates the highest projected return, but does the higher installment still let you sleep well at night? Or maybe the 2 million option leaves you with much more liquidity and breathing room. Like, wow, maybe I can stop working for 5 years and then still be able to pay the installments with no problem. But then, are you giving up too much long-term upside? But which option is actually right for you? That comes down to 3 things only you can answer. Number 1, do you believe that your income is stable for the next 5 to 10 years? Question 2, can you sleep soundly at night with the option you have picked? Because the best plan on paper is worthless if it keeps you awake at night. Number 3, do you believe that Singapore property will keep growing over the next 20 years? Because the whole case rests on that one belief. Every one of those projections sit on the assumption that Singapore's property market will continue to rise at stable and healthy levels. Nobody can promise you the 4.5% growth. Nobody. Not me, not any agent, not any YouTube guru, and maybe not even the government. The only thing I can say confidently is that Singapore property has been growing at an average of 4.1% over the last 20 years. So while the future has always been uncertain, what the numbers can do is to show you the shape of each choice, the cost, the runway, the risk, so you're not guessing in the dark. So if you're sitting on a property right now, quietly wondering the same thing, hold or switch, you don't have to guess anymore. Get the actual numbers for your situation. Then you can make the correct decision. And if there's something that you need help thinking through, you can always contact me via the link in the description. Don't worry, there won't be any hard sell. And if holding turns out to be your best move, I'll be the first to tell you that. And if this way of looking at property makes sense to you, I really appreciate it if you can consider subscribing. And before you make your next move, take 5 minutes to complete the property retirement scorecard in the description. It will give you more clarity about whether your property is working hard enough for you towards your retirement. Okay, I'll see you in the next one.